So first of all, overnight I left some resin in these gravestone moulds from Halloween, and to make the resin black I just mixed a bit of black ink, like alcohol ink, in there. And I wasn't sure they were going to set properly, but they did, so that was quite lucky. This was just using up the last of my regular resin, which is like a 50-50 mixture. So because it's a silicone mould, it's quite easy to pop the pieces out of the mould. You just have to make sure you've left them overnight to fully cure first. And I got the three gravestones that I chose out, and as you can see they look like this. Now obviously I am going to paint these, but I just put the black in the resin just to give them a head start, to make it easier, to make it so that the paint will be look more pigmented when I've painted them. First thing to do was to get some black acrylic paint and paint them with this. I do find acrylic paint seems to stick very well to the resin. I've never had any problems. I've used that to colour key rings and things before. If you're not sure, you could always put some of the paint on and then paint a layer of resin over the top, or some varnish to make sure it sticks. But because this is going to be in a frame and I'm not going to touch it, it doesn't matter. Plus it kind of adds to the effect if it chips anyway. Again, that's why I've made sure the resin was black to start off with. And I'm making sure that the black goes in all the nooks and crannies. It's got to go in all the little details and things, so that when I dry brush later on, those details stand out. So while the first layer of paint was drying on the tombstones, I worked on the background. So to do the background, I painted it black and then put a dot of white in the middle. And then, as you can see, I'm just adding more and more white, and then using circular motions, making the circles get larger and larger each time to blend it all in. And then occasionally on the outer edges, adding a bit more black. I want it to have a sort of like, almost like there's an arch in the trees, and there's like a glow in the distance sort of thing. So here I'm just adding a bit each time, and keep doing that until I'm happy with it. And then I want to add a couple of spooky trees in the background, and to do that I'm just going to use a thin brush and some black paint. And I'm going to not put leaves on or anything. I want them to be like proper branchy spooky trees. And I'm not going to paint like one singular tree in the middle. What I'm doing, I want to make it sort of look like there's like an archway of trees. So I'm doing the one tree here where you can see half the trunk and then some of the branches. And I start off with a slightly thicker brush, and then you'll see I'll change to a thinner brush for the finer details. So here I'm just working on the bigger of the branches. Like so. And I do go over some areas a couple of times. The paint was a bit wet for this, so what I actually did in the end was I used my heat gun just to dry off the background a bit to make it easier, and then switch to a smaller brush. And then it's just a case of adding more branches till I'm happy with the look of the tree. And then obviously I'm going to put a tree on the other side as well. So here I'm just using little sweeping motions to add the branches. Let some of the branches overlap some of the others as well. It makes it look a bit more realistic. And I want this in obviously silhouette as well, so that's why I'm doing it in black. And it's almost to make it look like the sort of, it's glowing in the distance. Maybe it's like really foggy in the like the scene, so that's why it sort of looks like a blurred sort of glow in the background. That's kind of the idea behind it. So here I'm adding some thinner branches, getting some to cross over and blend in with each other, and basically just keep adding branches until you're happy with how your tree looks. Doesn't have to be super realistic or anything. This is just for the background of the piece. I'm just going over some of the areas. The paint I'm using does actually dry matte, so it'll blend in a little bit more with the background once it's dry. And then I took a thicker brush and used that to fill in where the tree trunk would be. And also just to darken out that side. I want it to look like maybe like it's quite a thick tree on this side, and you know, it makes it look more like the trees in the foreground as opposed to the background. Then I'm adding the second tree trunk here. Just using the broad brush, and I want this tree to look like it's a bigger tree, so that's why I'm not too worried about the branches yet, and I'll just add a few at the top later on. And then in the foreground I want to add a bit of a sort of curve, which is like the end of the tree trunk as it goes into the ground, and I want the ground to look uneven, like so. And then what I do is add the branches onto the other tree. Now obviously if you're painting the background, you could paint the background before you stick the board into the frame. I just stuck it in the frame because I wanted more of an idea of what the space was I had to work with, and I don't mind working in the confines of the frame. But if you find it a bit too restricting, then do the painting sorry, I had a yawn then. Do the painting on the background and then stick it into place in the frame. And here I'm just working on the shape of the flooring. I want it to look a bit uneven and wobbly. And then using my heat gun, I'm just drying off the paint. It just makes life a lot easier because then I won't smudge anything. So then I can do the next layer. So as you can see, as the paint dries, because it's quite a matte colour black, it does blend in quite well into the background. And then I'm going to add some highlights. I want it to look like the light that's glowing in the background is just catching the bottom of some of the branches. So I'm just taking like a light grey and just adding that to the bottom of the branches here and there, just where the light's catching the branches. Just adds more to the sort of glowy effect, makes it look more like it's glowing. It just makes the branches look a little bit more 3D. I'm just doing that here and there, and a little bit on the trunk as well, just to give a hint of the texture of the trunk. It makes it look more like it's got a spooky glow to everything. And you'll see in a bit when I hold the stand the frame back up, you'll see what I mean. I'm just using a very thin brush, just little thin strokes here and there. And see how it makes it look like the glow is lighting up the tree in the foreground a little bit. And the great thing about this is if you don't like the effect, like if you think you've done it too much or something, you can just go over the area in black once you've dried it. Again, I'm using my heat gun to dry it off. You can use a hairdryer or you can just leave it to dry in between layers. It depends how much patience you've got. I haven't got a lot of patience, so I tend to prefer to dry stuff off and just get it done. Because I want to see the end result. I don't want to sit there for ages waiting for stuff to dry. So here I'm just making sure that the black paint has dried on the tombstones before I do the dry brushing. Because otherwise it becomes a bit of a pain and just everything smudges together. And out of the mould, I chose the three that look most sort of spooky, as it were. And then I'm taking some white paint on a brush, very dry. The first layer didn't work very well. You can see the details start to come out, but I did add a little bit more paint. My paint was a bit too dry at this stage. I did add a little bit of water to the brush as well, but normally you don't need to, you just need to add a bit more paint. But I wanted to reactivate that little bit of paint that was left on the glass. Obviously dry brushing you would have the brush drier, but never mind. I did sort of blend this in afterwards anyway. And I like how when you have like the black base and then you dry brush like white or grey over the top, how it gives it that sort of stony effect almost. And it makes those details really pop from the mould. Same with this one, it just really makes those details pop. And because the black base has been applied, that sticks to all the recesses, and then obviously when you dry brushing, you're only touching the very surface of the piece that you're making. Try not to do what I did, where I dropped the piece into the black paint. So I had to wipe off the paint and then dry it off and then reapply the dry brushing. But it's easy to fix, but yeah, try not to do that. I kept dropping that one for some reason. I think it's because I was trying to hold it and not get like my fingers covered in paint. But I wasn't holding it well enough to stop it from falling out my hands. See, I dropped it again. Luckily I missed the paint this time. And then I've got a little bit more white paint because I hadn't quite got enough, because that was basically like the first coat, and then I'll go over it with a little bit of a lighter colour. So the first coat was like a grey, and then I'll go over it with a tiny touch of white at the end, just to make things stand out a bit more. And when you do dry brushing, you want to get as much paint off the brush as you can. Just makes it work better. Here I'm just touching up the sides. I wasn't too worried about the sides because they're not going to be that visible from the piece once it's all in the frame. See what I mean? I kept dropping that one. So you can see the difference with the two that I've dry brushed and then the one that's just got the black background colour on. So I'm just going to touch this up. Here I'm just playing with my lighting because my lighting was being a bit weird. It was just for some reason how my camera was picking up the lighting on that day. I think it's because I hadn't got the overhead lights on. I'd only got the filming light on. So I think I needed my overhead lights on as well because it was getting a bit dull at this point. But as you can see, once you apply the dry brushing, it really makes those details stand out and gives a nice sort of stony effect to the tombstones, even though they're made out of resin. And like I said, I found the paint sticks really well to the resin. I've not had any problems with chipping or anything. And then it's just a case of applying a little bit more white anywhere where you want the details just to show up a little bit more, like so. So here I'm just doing the second coat to make everything really stand out. It looks really sort of white on the shot here, but it's actually still quite grey. And I'm just tickling the surface of the tombstones with the brush. And then once I was happy with those, it was a case of sticking them into the frame. And once in the frame, it looked like this. I added a little bit of moss as well. And this is what it looks like up on the wall. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.